Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Coffee with Jim and James. James, before you bring in our guests, I just say I'm really excited for this one. This is, I believe, our third episode in the Kickstart Your Culture series. And the reason I like this series is because how much I get to learn from these. It's almost like in reverse when we do an LNG or CNG and you sit over there and say, why you guys geek out about this. But when we have, two people that are so passionate about this topic and discussion and making it a reality, it does excite me. So, James, how are you today? I haven't really even said hi to you today yet.
We've been running in two different directions.
We have
In a
been,
good way, traveling the globe, spreading the word, spreading the gospel. Jimmy, I'm pumped to be here today. And again, we're kickstarting your culture, a series that we kicked off really off of a speaking topic that I kind of put together a few years, 18 months ago or so, to really help folks get activated out there, get really into looking at their culture, figuring out what's going on. And I've been blessed to be able to speak that into existence out there in the world. And I just got done at Oklahoma Gas Association there on the general session with this same topic. And I'll tell you, I've spoken a lot in our industry, but this topic resonates with everybody. I've never seen so many head nods. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what your role is. Guess what? Everybody has a culture, whether you're working on it or not. And I get so many people coming up to me afterwards and reaching out afterwards to talk, or they'll come back the next day and say, well, you were quite the topic at dinner last night, which is funny. But it's a cool thing. Today, we are talking about being real and vulnerable. And we have an expert today. Second time guest, Ashley Knight, who we befriended. I mean, that was probably 18 months ago, a year ago.
At
It's been a while.
Wasn't
Some
it
things
SGA?
have happened.
Yeah, a lot of things have happened.
We did. We befriended her there when we won the award. And we had Ashley on the show. And honestly, we geeked out about culture. And I said, hey, we're going to put together this series and we're going to have you back and look at it. We did it, Ashley.
We did it.
Welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. A lot has changed since we were together. And so it's great to be back together, even in this continuing these virtual conversations together. So
we're gonna have to do this in person.
We are.
Ashley, out in full disclosure, when I emailed Ashley about this, she was, lightning fast. Yes, I'm in. I didn't even know the topic. She was just, I'm in. It's culture, I'm in. So she was the first to respond. Ashley, for those that maybe didn't watch your episode, we won't judge you. But will you do us a favor and just bring everybody along what your role is and who you're with?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So again, I'm Ashley Knight with Southern Star Central Gas Pipeline. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources and been here for, goodness, about 3.5 years. And so thanks for having me. It has been a great time in our industry over the last few years. And then we all know what the world has been doing over the last couple of years. So it has been the highlight of my career from an HR perspective to be a part of the mission.
All of our tools.
Yes.
And make up some new ones.
Absolutely.
Amen. And I'm so proud of Jim today because Jim has not made one HR joke yet. Like normally he would have said, I think in the last one, when I see a meeting with a VP of HR.
It was
so
on
proud
the
of
tip
him.
of my
I'm so proud.
tongue, and I bit my tongue because James, this is
It's a treat today. It's a treat. Ashley, thanks again for joining us. I'm going to jump right in because we're here for a reason today. We're talking about being real and vulnerable. And I'll be honest, when I kind of put this together, this particular portion about being real and vulnerable, and I thought about the first times I heard this in a business setting, right? And I thought about it this morning, and I go back to a book that one of my books. I mean, my books in business is Good to Great by Jim Collins, which I'm sure a lot of people, of course, right? Of course it is. What else do you like? Seven Habits. It's just so basic, right? But in that, he talked about facing the brutal facts. And there's a chunk about that. And I didn't pull it, and I won't read it verbatim or anything. I'll go poorly off my memory. But when I first heard that, it was talking about, these great teams had the ability to get in a room and face the brutal facts. And sometimes those were tough conversations. But they were able to do that again and again and again. And to me, that was the first time I had really heard about, because when he talks about those conversations, those brutal facts conversations, he talked about how the walls finally come down and you are vulnerable. And now looking back, I realized that was really the first time I had heard about it, and I had gotten indoctrinated in it. And I remember that stuck. I mean, really, one of my books, probably the one that changed me and made me want to read everything, was this book. And so actually, I was anxious to ask you kind of similarly, what kind of lit that fire of vulnerability, for you?
Yeah, man, that's a big question. I'm like you. I've got my big
I know,
bookshelf
right?
behind me too, and now I'm leaning more into my morning podcast. But to your point, it's yes, Jim Collins was obviously well
Sure.
ahead of his times in what we needed to be talking about today. But for me, I had unfortunately worked for a lot of organizations early in my career where it was especially from an HR and a culture perspective. And I think we talked about this the last episode, leave your luggage, leave your bags at the door, cut off life
Baggage claim.
and come
Right.
here. Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's unfortunate to talk about vulnerability. I don't know that I subscribed to the vulnerability, the value of vulnerability until my sister Brene Brown threw it
Sure.
down.
Holy
And
cow.
that is when it felt like there was space, and almost it was that permission was granted to
I
bring
think I
your
needed,
bags, bring it in.
Ashley, I think I needed somebody to curse at me, in a book for it to
Yep,
hit me. I'm like, okay,
yep,
I'm listening now, Brene. No, it is.
absolutely.
She has changed a lot of us. So we've done book studies within our groups, several. I've got Atlas to the Heart. I don't know. I just keep going back. That's like the best reference book ever.
Yep.
I don't know if you've got through that one. Dare to Lead is a book study we do internally now with groups. And that one, man, we talk about boo-hooing with your friends. Whew.
It's
We've
a
gotten into
powerful
some
book.
stuff
There's
in
some
there.
unbelievable lessons,
Why
especially.
Brene Brown, Ashley? Why Brene Brown for you?
I think it was as she talked a lot about, and I'll lean into just being a woman in the space, for a minute. I think it's tough, coming in sometimes whenever you're moving through leadership or you're in a new industry, especially a very male dominated industry.
For sure.
Sometimes you feel the need to be a man, show up that way, be hard,
Mm,
no emotions, no feelings, and that's the way. And unfortunately, that was almost kind of the unwritten rule, the secret that was whispered in your ear, 15 years
that
ago, coming
that
up.
handshake better be tough.
Yep, yep,
Firm.
all of those things. And heaven forbid that you need to walk away to answer a call from someone, being whether you're the soon to be the primary caregiver in your family.
No doubt.
Man, that what you push those things way down,
Yeah.
because it was almost a component of weakness, or priority, right? That your priority isn't at work, and we need everybody 100% focused here, and family and life is pushed down. And
I, I
that was the root of corporate culture in America for a long time.
I remember being in a meeting. I'm not disclosing anything. I remember being in a meeting one time at a company, and someone had a situation come up. You could tell. I mean, they just changed. They were, texting, and I just slid over and was like, just head out, like no big deal, just slide out. And they left. And the next morning, well, I'm sorry, that later that day, they reached out and they were apologizing about just profusely about, and I'm so sorry. And I understand you, kicking me out of the meeting or whatever. And I was like, no, I wasn't kicking you out of the meeting. Like, you're not in trouble. You were obviously needing to do something. You weren't in the meeting. I mean, we need you present. Go take care of your business. Nobody's upset. Like, things happen. And I remember that person just looking at me, because I think for them, that might have been the first time they'd ever heard that. But Ashley, we grew up. I mean, I grew up in an industry, not even this one, period, in the workforce, hearing those same things of leave it at the door. And, you definitely didn't cry in baseball,
If I could jump in, I sometimes we don't see it. And James, I'm thinking about back to a time where you did that to me, actually. You may not remember this, but I was having some challenges in the phone, and you're like, hey man, just go take 20
I
minutes.
sent him back to Florida one time.
When I was like, no, I got it handled. You're like, no, you're all over the board. Go do your stuff. And it's hard. It was hard for me because I'm like, no, I need to, compartmentalize
I got
it.
this. Yep,
and it's
absolutely.
difficult, but it takes courage and friendships. And I use those very emphatically in this case, to listen to people and to take that time to let it register and to go do your stuff so you can do your things at work. And what, 20 minutes made a big difference, James.
Well, and if it's when it's hard, and I think it sounds like we've all had those similar instances. And for me, as I can be very stubborn, and
this is the first we're hearing of this. We know
Oh,
Ashley well enough to know that. She's always seemed nice to us.
Whenever I had to put myself in a different lens and realize that me not recognizing that I need to walk away, or I need to take this time and be unplugged, that was creating its own level of toxicity for my team. Because me not doing it
100%.
wasn't allowing them comfort and courage to do what they needed to do. And man, once that hit me, and it hit me hard, one time, and I'll never forget it. And I thank that person for having the courage to say, hey, I know you have a lot of capacity, Ashley, and you feel like you can do this and you feel like you need to, but it actually is incredibly intimidating, and it doesn't make me feel comfortable when I can't do it, to feel like, hey, I need to tap out for a little bit.
What precedents are you setting, right?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the other point, and it'll be an episode in itself, but is being the example, right? Holding the door. Sometimes that's not holding the door, right? And when you're not your best, and stepping back and saying, I need a minute, so that your people feel comfortable saying, hey, I need to step back, need a minute. I don't remember if we talked about this the last time we were together, but I'll bring it up again. I think a good example I've recently done and continue to do with my teams is make sure they understand when I send things after hours. Like, it's just that I'm like thinking of something, right? It's a respect thing, not that they have to do it at that moment. Just that reminder, or that I'm working at 4 a.m. is because I'm an insomniac, not because I expect anyone else, right? Like those little moments of just being okay. Love it. Well, we talk a little bit about it, but I think in the nature of today's episode and being vulnerable, let's be vulnerable, Jimmy. We talk about building cultures, for folks, but we are also those folks, myself, you, Ashley, Jim. We're on the other side of that culture, living it and an active participant in it. And I wonder, is there any moments that stick out, personally for each of you that maybe where maybe now looking back, you could have been more vulnerable, or here recently, now that we're more educated and more conscious of vulnerability, where you've been on that other side and being vulnerable has turned out not so bad? Because it's hard, right? It's hard. Brene Brown says it's awkward for 8 seconds, right? It feels a lot more like a lot longer than 8 seconds sometimes, especially when you're getting started in vulnerability. Jimmy, do you have any moments or thoughts, or
Oh,
anyone?
absolutely. Yeah,
I'll
no,
open
and
it up.
this is really good, and I'll open it up right here. And my biggest concern is not walking the talk. And what I mean by that is I'll look back to my past days, like when I was CEO, and I would emphatically look to people in my organization that looked like they needed help and encourage them to do that, encourage them to, step outside, take the phone call, do whatever you need to do. Your family comes first, all those type of things. Yet I wasn't doing what I was talking.
Yeah,
And
for
so,
sure.
and I think back at that, and I think to myself that as a leader at that time, and as a leader now, if I'm not walking the talk, people really aren't buying into it. They're like, "Oh, he's telling me to go outside, but he never does it. He doesn't do that. He does, he leaves it at the door." And I think it's hard. It doesn't matter who you are, at what area you're working in, and or what your role is or whatever. Sometimes it's hard to be vulnerable because you think that's a weakness, or you
Yeah,
perceive that as a fault or something like that. And that's a mindset that not everybody has, but some of us do have. And that's a challenge for me. And again, it's more realization and letting your true self come through is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. If that makes it all sense.
I've had to hang out with Jimmy a lot the last 3 years.
Oh, God
It's
help you.
basically been our job, and I will say I've seen so much growth in Jim Shower in that respect. We've been kind of a support group for each other,
We have.
and
Yep.
we've seen each other at our worst and best, and I
Yep.
can say I've seen considerable growth in you, Jimmy.
Thank you. I
Look
appreciate
at
it.
that.
Aw,
Look at us.
yes.
Somebody have a tissue. I think I'm getting a little misty.
All right. Ashley, how about you? Any
Um,
moments?
Gosh, there have been a lot of moments. I'll say there was a pretty big one for me in the last couple of years though. And I one day I hope that this pandemic and this life change that we're in
Yep.
is more behind us. But the truth is that we're still in the thick of it and we're still trying to figure it out. And so for me, it was, I remember the day that we went home and everybody went home, and from an HR perspective, it was incredibly heavy whenever you're dealing with the true safety and health of the
Yeah.
organization. And for me, it was those long, days that I never saw the sun come up or the sun go down. It was at the dining room table, constant, and it was the grind, and my children, my husband, all of those things. I would unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say how many hours I would actually see them in those weeks, and months actually at the beginning of the pandemic, because of where the attention needed to lie. And then as things started to open up, I was pretty proud to be able to say, hey, I'm at the soccer field and I've got my laptop. And so I'm doing it all. And this is how you do it all, team. And
Yeah.
I thought that was great. I thought that was a great way for me to demonstrate, the blend of it all. And I spent probably at least a year, on the sidelines with, it's, checking out to get to my daughter's practice that I never would have done or been able to do when I was in the office. And then something pretty incredible happened, that really had to kind of give me a bigger pause than I was prepared for. We brought our third daughter into the world earlier this year, and so for me,
Congrats.
it was thank you. It was a moment I had to I knew that I wanted to unplug and spend those months with her. And I had an incredible team who was, more than prepared to take the torch and carry on what needed to be done for Southern Star. But it wasn't until I came back from that, 12 weeks of stepping away that, a few months later, I had someone on my team say, you're different and we feel it. And it's because unfortunately, it took 3 months of me completely stepping away from the business for me to realize that doing both, I'm not doing good. I'm not being good at anything. I'm not being there for my daughter when she scores and I was sending that email. And it's like that's
Right.
almost just as bad as not being there at all. And then I'm distracted with doing what I need to do to put out my best output at work. So it wasn't until I was able to say, hey, I'm not going to be available for the next couple of hours because, I'm going to step away and be, at the gymnastics meet. I'm probably not going to be checking my phone. It was whenever I really started to make those cuts and separated and said, hey, I'm not going to be available, which I've never said in my life. And I didn't realize until someone on my team said that you just saying it that way gave me permission to feel like now I can step away and talk about the emotion. I mean, that hit me, and the guilt hit me of, that my actions or what I thought was an act of vulnerability and saying, we can do it all. We can be there. We can be here. That's selfish of us as well, that we can't allow people. Part of the culture shift has to be, James, I've got to be able to also support you in being, the best father that you can be, being an incredible husband. And what does that look like? It doesn't mean that we've still got a little piece of your attention here. That's not fair either. And so it's finding ways and demonstrating that you blending it all is wearing our people out. And it's not just it's a culture shift that's happening across the country where we're mistaking that that's the answer, when instead it's contributing to having the most overworked feelings and mental health issues that we've ever had in the wake of the country. I think that is the root of a lot of it.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
That's why you're here.
Yes, that is. Let me just add into that one thing that I've learned, a little tip and trick, out of office. I'm looking at the screen over there that I would typically use in years past for a vacation. I've now become accustomed to maybe using a little bit more like, hey, I'm out for the next 3 hours. I'll get back to you. For the people who are receiving it, they're probably like, yeah, no big deal. But for me mentally, knowing that I'm telling people I'm out of pocket for a few hours helps me so much more, where I can concentrate on what I'm doing. And then when I get back, I can fully concentrate on them, that I don't have that anxiety or that angst of, looking at this thing all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. Look at y'all. Growing up. Now I feel obligated.
What do you think, James?
I got to make up a story.
You gotta give us a story.
No, I'm gonna go back to what I think is a positive moment for me in vulnerability, because I kind of worked on. I don't know. I've burned out. I have a bad habit of burning out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Keep
just
going.
be honest.
You don't
I work
stop.
really, really, really hard, and it sucks, and I burn out. That's just what I've done my entire career. And then, but I realized that when I shifted this last time, actually when I left the industry I was in and moved to Energy WorldNet, was because I'd burn out again, right? And so my eyes were really open, and I didn't want to do that again. And then you get going, and there's so much opportunity, and there's so many cool things to do, and projects, and all this cool. I mean, there's so much to do, guys. So then I was there again very quickly. We went through a rebrand, which was probably the biggest logistical project of my life, and I've built really big things when I was back on the tech side, but this thing was just, there were a lot of working pieces, and I owned and wore a lot of that during that time. And it was the first year of the pandemic. So in other words, we the bulk of this project was done remote. Well, that was the gift of all gifts because there were no distractions, right? So, I mean, I could work, like you said, Ashley, I could work 17 hours a day. Like, that was cool.
Yep.
And I could work from my phone and I could do all the things, right? And so I did. And so I really, again, approaching burnout very quickly. And then we had to like educate the company on this new brand and this new feeling and this new culture. And it was really about culture. And I had to basically deliver it to our ELT. And I cried as I did it. Right. And I was like, gosh, man, I'm burned out. Like I'm a little onion, you know, you strip it all down. I'm tired. I'm beat, you know. They said, go give it to leadership, you know, the greater leadership. Did it again, bawled in front of them like a loser. And then they said, everybody needs to hear it. We went whole company and I cried in front of them. And I look back at it, and so many people came to me after that because we were all feeling it. I mean, this was like October of 2020. So it was like when you had enough and you thought 7 different times it was over, but it really wasn't. And it was bad. And everybody was scared to death. And so many people came up to me after that and was like, gosh, it feels so good to just know I'm not crazy, like that I'm not the only one feeling like this.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And quickly after that, I had to tell everybody I was burnt out, you know, and everybody was like, you are. And I've been there. And, you know, that was a story. And when I realized all these things were happening, nobody was talking about, you know, everybody was burning out. Everybody was having mental health issues. All, you know, we knew it was coming, Ashley. We knew we talked about it.
Yep.
Last time we were together, how bad it was going to be. We're here, right? Being the example in that moment and not knowing it, I think for me was kind of that aha moment. And I didn't even know what happened. I was just, normally I would go compartmentalize that out of what I was doing.
Yep.
And it would have sucked the life out of what we were creating at the same time. So, that's a
You just
little
gave me
moment.
all the chills. Wow.
Anyway,
Awesome.
what are we doing here? So here's what people are asking, right? I bet people are saying, all right, this is cool, but
yeah,
y'all obviously are going to work on your cultures. You've done work on your cultures. You're doing work, you know, you're an active participant. But back at my place of business, whoever it is, random audience member, we're not that progressive, right? Or I don't have that kind of influence or whatever it might be, right? The goal of this series is to empower the folks listening to turn around and try to influence where they can, right? So coming to vulnerability and talking about that, actually, how can you motivate folks? What are some ideas or some thoughts you have to get people taking vulnerability back to their organization?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of, for whatever, vulnerability feels really heavy, right? And it feels really touchy feely, and that alone makes people proceed with caution about it. And so I think if we just, for me, I had to have a conversation with myself. We all do that, right?
we do.
About what is vulnerability. And for me, it's curiosity and feedback. And I think if you can, and if that works for you, I think if you can really define vulnerability in a safer way for yourself, or in an actionable way. For me, it was being curious, asking questions, being inquisitive, and then seeking out the feedback. And for me, operationalizing those two components, I think, were a great start for demonstrating vulnerability, for me and for my team, because I love, you know, our friend Brene said, you know, if you don't know how to do vulnerability, then vulnerability is doing you. And
sure.
that is something that I would encourage every leader to take back, because it's not going to be a corporate initiative, or you know, a policy change, or a new,
It's not a
you know,
webinar.
it's
Like,
not.
it
That's
isn't
not
this
how.
podcast. Like,
No, it is. That's not how we're going to get to the other side of it. It's going to be each leader taking the onus on themselves to do something different, find ways to be curious, find ways to seek out that feedback, and recognize that people are tired of the hustle, and we want real people. And so whatever way is genuine, because I'll also add, being your authentic self, that's status quo now, right? That used to be something to strive towards.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to find a way to be authentic with who you are, but also create those spaces to be curious, to give the feedback. And man, that we've been having those conversations, James, about how do you what does culture look like? And and it's funny, I've been having some listening sessions across the organization, and the pre-pandemic population honestly defines our culture differently than the post-pandemic population. And so that's the interesting piece, is we defined our culture in the past of, we had a lot of fun together. It was work hard, play hard.
That's how ours was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Pumpkin carvings and door decorating
yes,
contests and, the potlucks, like that was what
exactly.
that, I don't want to say their legacy, but pre-pandemic is a good way to put it. Folks, that's what they expect. So we do have to cater. I'm not saying cater in a bad way. I'm saying literally cater in lunch for those people, right?
Yep.
But also the remote people have a different concept of it and have enjoyed some of the initiatives that we've put in place. And how do you manage that divide or be conscious of that? And I hate to say blended after you trashed blending so bad, but in a different sense, right? Yeah, for sure. One thing you said, listening sessions. I think that's fantastic, right? If you're not doing that, well, I'm gonna label it a different way too, a little more formal, as we do stay interviews, and they were so valuable because I'll put it at any level. You have no clue what makes somebody's life hell at whatever it is they do, right? I mean, it could have been that one software license that you didn't approve that was $9,
Yep.
you know, and it could have changed their life, but you don't know that because you didn't ask the question, like, what can I get out of your way? And you make that one change, and now they're here 10 minutes earlier because they want to chat with you before work. Like, I'm just saying, it's the simplest and smallest, could be the smallest transaction out there, and that you just haven't addressed yet. And it's in those little moments, Ashley, I think, that are so important, that what are your leaders saying and doing, down the line somewhere, in those little micro moments that really shape your culture, right? I mean,
It's the
if
shadow of the leader, right? And it's I think leaders know that, but
it's
it
easy,
is
it's easy
heavier
to
than ever. Absolutely.
it's
It's
easy to
heavier
let
than
our language slip, and you know how so and so is, like it just happens. We get complacent, we get, you know a little more leisurely with our language with each other, and maybe have a bad day, and all of a sudden, you've said the wrong thing in the wrong moment. So
Yeah.
very interesting.
And I think
um,
the other piece, James, is if you're a leader of leaders,
mhm,
and I think it's also important, grace is everything right now, and understanding that
Big
we
word.
we have spent so much time learning how to lead people through physically seeing them, right? Walking management by walking around, right? Those are the principles that we built, that leadership was built on. And, we've got to give grace to our leaders. This is still incredibly new space, and they're having to find, we talked about those tools. Leaders are having to use different tools and find new tools, and we're
yeah.
still making
And their
about
tool
half the
belt, yeah,
tools.
their tool belts
Absolutely.
aren't as big as yours, right? I mean,
Yep.
you may have had more years, more experience, more training, whatever it might be. We're building the track while we run on it, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
that's for sure in
Absolutely.
some of these moments. I love it. I love grace. And Jimmy, you know what I'm about to say, I'm sure, but don't forget to include yourself in that grace conversation,
Absolutely.
Right.
because
Right.
we often leave ourselves out, as our friend Brene Brown says.
Yeah.
Um, don't be sure to give yourself the same
Great.
amount that you give others, right? I
Yes.
mean,
That's hard to do.
And that's hard. Yes, absolutely.
It's hard to
So,
do.
look, we could talk about this forever.
You guys could geek out all day on this, couldn't you?
We
I'm
probably
learning a
will.
lot, though. I
Yeah.
really love these conversations.
I
Talk
do.
about listening. This listening session for me has been very impactful.
Yeah.
And I'll call it a listening session for me because, again, my purpose here is I want to keep getting those tip and tricks. Doesn't matter where you are or where I am in my career, I am always still learning and understanding better ways to help myself as well as help other team members.
We're
So
spreading the word right now, right? Hopefully somebody's picking it up. Ashley, we end the show with just a thought, and this one's no different. We'd love just to hear from you. Anything you'd like to leave people with, and just in the terms of vulnerability or culture or anything on your heart. Now's your time.
I think this is a very broad kind of piece that I'll leave that can apply to whatever's on your heart today is being intentional. And so I think it's easy to, if you're listening right now and you're focused on, your own learning and development and takeaways, be intentional and be accountable to yourself. You deserve it, and the people that are around you deserve it. And so whatever that looks like, if that's putting a calendar reminder for yourself to do something different every Thursday, to share some gratitude with someone, to ask for feedback. That's something that I've done that's been really powerful, is literally putting it on my calendar and to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'd love to get some feedback from you, because those are gifts. Whenever someone can trust you and feel comfortable to give you that feedback, that's powerful. And so just be intentional with whatever it is that is on your heart today. Have some intent behind it, and have some action.
Be present. Be intentional.
That's intentional.
Yes.
I love that.
Seriously, that's a great word.
I do.
Yeah.
We preach a lot to be present, be intentional, be deliberate, right? So I love it. I love it. Ashley, it's been a treat. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you,
I'm
Ashley.
sure we'll have you back. We'll just narrow it out again.
Wait, a repeat? Are we talking a third time?
I mean, we would be doing this world.
Roadshow.
We might have her back for another one in the series, because
I think we
I don't
should.
know. I loved how being the example came up.
It's been fantastic.
Well, all of them came up, I feel like, today. So,
and let me just make sure before we end, I just want to make sure these are the conversations we need to take back, because people like me that are still navigating have learned. And so again, if we do this, good things will happen. So I thank you both for that. For me personally, Dave.
I'll put this out into the world too. I'm sure, Ashley, I won't speak for you, but if you have any questions, culture questions, you want to bounce ideas or have a soundboard on some things going on, I'm always chatting with folks on email. I'd love to. I'll do a webinar for you on this very thing. But Ashley and I bounce ideas off of each other on the HR side of the world and culture side. I'm sure she'd be open to it as well.
Absolutely.
I'm always an open book. So, all right. Well, hey.
Thanks, Ash. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. See you all next time.